Greetings to all our learners, all our viewers. Welcome to the lecture on understanding environmental regimes. I am Dr. Amna. I teach political science at Shyama Prasad Mukherjee College for Women, University of Delhi. Now, dear learners, as we take the learning forward on environmental regimes, now this lecture will be of great help to students from the discipline of political science, international relations and other related disciplines wherein environment today has a bearing. This will try to explain the learners that there has been proliferation of environmental regimes. Now, this not only points towards importance of environment, surroundings, ecology for domestic as well as for global politics, but it will also show that today environmental governance has areas of challenges and opportunities which the state, the global forces, the international milieu must take into account. So, let's understand that today when we talk about environmental regimes, today there is proliferation of norms, institutions, summits, forums which are focusing towards environment. This presents a picture of institutionalization of global environmental policy and at the same time the complexity of various international environment regimes. This presents a picture of intersections, interdependencies, interactions at the same time which may be conflictual because the agenda of environment is maybe that is wherein the idea of drawing consensus may not work out at times. So therefore environmental regimes, or to say international environmental regimes, today they are the key in dealing with the issues of global environment, the various aspects of global environmental change problems. In international environment regime, now in order to put a definite definition, we take the help of the work presented by Young, that is, international environmental regimes are a type of institution where an institution is understood as cluster of rights, rules and decision-making procedures that give rise to a social practice, assigns roles to participants in the practice and guides interaction among occupants of these roles. When we look at the idea of environmental governance, the first institution, before we actually go on to understand examples of regimes, the first institution that we take up for study is United Nations Environment Program. UNEP, as an organization, it was established in 1972 to guide and coordinate environmental activities within the UN system. Let's have a look at the functions of UNEP, which we take from the web sources of unep.org. That is, UNEP looks into early warning of environmental threats. It tries to work on elaboration of international environmental legislation for sustainable development. It attempts for raising public awareness on international environmental policy and activities. Then it brings into focus other areas in which require efforts in the realm of environment, and most important, rendering assistance on policy development. When we talk about environmental issues in global politics, Rachel Carson, the American marine biologist, the book Silent Spring was the work that drew the attention of everyone towards environment becoming a global issue. The book is also seen as a precursor towards advancement of global environmental movement. Some of the quotes from the book that we present right now in order to sensitize and update our learners about the huge issues that are involved when we try to understand environment, not only for domestic politics but as an issue of non-traditional security dimension that has a bearing for global politics. Some of the quotes from Rachel Carson's work, that is, those who contemplate the beauty of the earth find reserves of strength that will endure as long as life lasts. I quote Rachel Carson's, "In nature, nothing exists alone." Another quote, "But man is a part of nature, and his war against nature is inevitably a war against himself." Now, these quotes, this work presents to us two important things. First, the interactions and interface between human beings and the external environment, the surroundings, and then it points out how this interaction over the years was sustainable, but however the rampant pace of exploitation and humans' attempt to conquer the environment has disturbed the balance. So therefore, an important term that comes up, that is anthropogenic. This term anthropogenic designates an effect or an object that is resulting from human activity. Now, human activities that can damage the environment directly or indirectly on a global scale could be about overconsumption, rise in population, overexploitation, increase in land, air, sea and noise pollution, issues of deforestation, and all of it have led to a chain reaction wherein we are hearing about global warming, climate change, depletion of ozone layer, amongst others. Now, this issue of environment becoming a global problem requires regulations and conventions and the institutions through which they are being managed or that they can be managed. If you look at the data, today there are more than thousands of multilateral environmental agreements, several thousands of bilateral environment agreements, say about 250 over environmental agreements, and huge amount of other agenda and things that are there going in the environmental regimes. So when we look at the holistic debate, so there are four regime components: principles, norms, rules, and decision making procedures. All of it needs to be understood for understanding the dynamics that are involved in the environmental governance, in the complexities of environmental regimes also. Now, international environmental agreements, therefore, they offer information, they offer scopes of diplomacy, and thereby one of the aspects of their advantage is that they alter states' cost benefit analysis, the inputs that states take in for decision making. They provide very important crucial information about the issues, aspects of environmental degradation. Multilateral environmental agreements therefore are international legal instruments, and the sole aim is goal of environmental protection. So therefore, when we are looking at international environmental regimes, another aspect that comes here is protocol. Now, international politics, we know that protocol, they imply etiquettes of diplomacy. Protocol is a rule which describe how an activity should be performed. So amidst all this, we see that how environment from being an issue that was once about just when we look at Rachel Carson's work about sensitization of everyone about environment becoming a global issue, towards another aspect, that is today there are attempts being made in order to place environment towards the realm of governance. Now, this governance with the international environmental agreements, multilateral environmental agreements, they are comprising of principles, norms, rules, and definite decision making procedures. Let's have some examples in order to understand how there has been proliferation of environmental regimes. When first is Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto Protocol was an international treaty which extended the 1992 United Nations Framework Conventions for Climate Change. Now, when we look at United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, its main function was diagnosing early warning of environmental threats, looking into elaboration of international environmental legislation for sustainable development, raising public awareness or international environmental policies and activities, giving assistance on policy development. Then UNFCCC that commits states parties to reduce greenhouse gas emission based on scientific consensus that global warming is occurring, and it is extremely likely that human-made carbon dioxide emissions have caused this global warming. So therefore, all of it, we see that over a period of time it evolved, because environmental over a period of time has become an important concern. The Kyoto Protocol, for example, was adopted in Kyoto in Japan on 11 December 1997 and then entered into force on 16 February 2005. Now, this also shows that the complexities involved in establishing principles, norms, the dynamics involved in establishing any protocol about environmental diplomacy. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, it is an international environmental treaty that was adopted on 9th May 1992 and then opened for signatures at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro from 3rd to 14 June 1992. Then it entered into force on 21st March 1994 after a sufficient number of countries had ratified it. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, when we look at the objectives, it's trying to stabilize greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. Then the framework sets not only binding, non-binding limits on the greenhouse gas emissions for individual countries and contains no enforcement mechanisms. Instead, the framework outlines how specific international treaties, which are protocols or agreements, may be negotiated to specify further action towards the objectives of the UNFCCC. Then another convention that when we look at proliferation of environmental regimes is the Convention on Access to Information, Public Participation in Decision Making and Access to Justice in Environmental Matters. It is often known as the Aarhus Convention, which was signed on 25th June 1998 in the Danish city of Aarhus, and it entered into force on 30th October 2001. Further, when we look at that how there has been proliferation of various regimes, it also talks about how diverse is environment as an agenda. That is wherein the issues of the developed world come into contrast with the issues of the developing world. That is wherein we situate the blame. Who is responsible for depletion of the global environment? Again, taking our discussion forward, the Aarhus Convention grants the public rights regarding access to information, public participation, access to justice in governmental decision-making process on matters concerning local, national and transboundary environmental issues. It also focuses on the interactions between the public and the other authorities. So therefore, you see that how conventions and regimes over a period of time have not only risen but also presented different dynamics that are involved in environment as an issue. The Basel Convention on the Control of Transboundary Movements of Hazardous Waste and their Disposal, often called as the Basel Convention, this is an international treaty that was designed to reduce the movements of hazardous waste between nations and specifically to prevent the transfer of hazardous waste from developed to less developed countries. Another example, the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD. The Convention on Biological Diversity is informally known as the Biodiversity Convention. Its main goal is that is looking into the conservation of biological diversity, the biodiversity, sustainable use of various components that are there in biodiversity, and fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from genetic resources. Another example, United Nations Convention to combat desertification in those countries experiencing serious drought under desertification. This is a convention to combat desertification and mitigate the effects of drought through national action programs that incorporates long-term strategies supported by international cooperation and partnership agreements. Now, examples are many, but when we have looked at these examples, today we see that today environment is an issue of non-traditional security dimension that has acquired huge significance not only for the domestic politics but also for the global affairs. Today, when we look at that, how there is proliferation of environment agreements and regimes, from Convention on Biological Diversity to the Basel Convention to the Aarhus Convention, this shows that within environment as an agenda, there is multidimensionality. One focus is on biodiversity, other focus is on justice in the realm of environmental governance. The other's focus is about the larger aspect of climate change and rise of greenhouse gases. So therefore, environment today is a diverse agenda, and in this diverse agenda today we see that the idea of sustainable development is one of the principal issues of not only United Nations but as a principle that is being factored in the works of several multinational corporations also. That is, sustainable development as an organizing principle, it talks about meeting human development goals while simultaneously sustaining the ability of the natural systems to provide natural resources and ecosystem services based upon which the economy and society depend. Taking this notion of sustainable development forward, we have sustainability as an aspect, that is meeting the needs of the present without compromising on the ability of future generations to meet their needs. The concept of sustainability is comprised of three pillars, that is economic, environmental and social. To name profits, planet and people. They are often known as the four pillars of sustainability. So therefore, when we look at environment regimes and the issue of environment in global politics, let's understand that environment is an important factor. Climate change, global warming, desertification, all of these are various dimensions of global environment problems. The threats of environment, they cut across border. This is why environmental security today is an important concept of human security. In the realm of global politics, security was traditionally seen in the sense of the real understanding of the realist discourse, that is security provided by the military aspect. However, today there has been a revision to the aspect of security which places the human beings in contrast to the state in the center of analysis. In this concept of human security, environmental security is an important aspect, because when the climate changes, when there are vagaries of climate, it is human beings that are there at the center, and environmental security places to the attention of policy makers, that is, without a secure individual there cannot be a safe state. Similarly, this individual cannot be safe and secure without safe and secure surroundings and environment. So this is why today we see that there are regulations, conventions and institutions through which countries are trying to manage global environment problems. There are various types of global environment problems, and the root cause of any environmental problem is the anthropogenic perspective, that is how human activities are harming or impacting the environment. All human beings have always interacted with the environment. The earliest form of human civilization was a nomad, where man was a food gatherer, food hunter. But however, the balance between humans and the ecology was sustained. Today, with rampant human activities, increase in population, overconsumption, overexploitation, deforestation, loss of flora and fauna, various forms of pollution, this delicate balance between human and the environment is being disturbed, and this is why on a global scale there are concerns about environment being an important aspect. This is why today we hear about proliferation of multilateral environment agreements, bilateral environmental agreements, and other types of environment agreements. Any regime has four important components, that is principles, norms, rules, and decision making. And when we look at it, this again presents to us the complexity that is involved for states and for individuals to look into when we are trying to debate not only environmental governance but also environment security. Today, international environmental agreements, they offer great amount of important information for policy making for the states, and this can also let the states to have a change in the narrative of their working with an agenda that is sustainable to balance the past, present and future. The multilateral environment agreements, they are legal instruments with the aim of global environmental protection. So therefore, we see that how today the environmental agenda over the years, when we see the Kyoto Protocol, when we see the UNFCCC, all of it over a period of time has expanded, and this tells us the dynamism that is further there in the global environment agenda. Today, no country can call itself safe and secure unless and until it tries to strike the chord of sustainability in terms of its interface with the larger micro as well as macroeconomic framework. And to conclude, that is, environment as an agenda talks about a holistic environment within which the humans and the state exist together. Environment as an agenda and the proliferation of environmental regimes thereof point light towards that how today the understanding of security has expanded beyond the traditional concerns. Environment as an agenda and the issue of sustainable development presents to us that growth and development and ecology need not be seen in contradictory terms. With sound decision making, judicious balance between human activities and the environment, one can strive to strike the best balance between development and ecology. Now, as we conclude our lecture, some important work that we must look into for further understanding and for further readings. Patrick Hayden's work, that is Debating Environmental Regimes, very important work, which not only gives us examples of proliferation of environmental regimes but also tells us about the global commons debate and various other issues involved in environment. Another important work, that is Environmental Regime Effectiveness, contouring theory, confronting theory with evidence. This is an edited book, and again a very important piece of work to understand the concept of environmental regimes and their implications not only for international organization, international governance, but also pointing towards the domestic apparatus of several states. Another important work, an edited work by Oran R. Young, that is Effectiveness of International Environmental Regimes. So dear learners, this was the lecture on proliferation of environmental regime. When we look at environment, one has to take into account that it is an important global issue. There has been proliferation of norms, of conventions, of protocols, and all of it presents to us a picture wherein there has been significant amount of increase of not only environmental agenda but also international environmental regimes to strike a balance between various concerns of environment, from climate change to desertification to issues of justice of environmental governance. And most important, this also brings to us the need to have a systematic policy of all nations in order to deal with changes of environment. We hope you all learnt and you hope all enjoyed the lecture today on understanding environmental regimes for international and global politics. Thank you.